Welcome back to Rich Words Music, where today we're shooting out these two guitars. Now this is my trusty Harley Benton SC Junior in black, and this is the Vintage V120 in Two Tone Sunburst. And I can see why a few of you asked me to shoot these two out. They're very similar guitars on the face of it. They're both single cuts with P90 pickups and loads of Wilkinson appointments on them. They're also both clearly tipping the hat to the iconic Gibson Les Paul Junior guitar. So what I'm going to do then is quickly tell you about the specs and the features of each guitar. Then we'll play a bunch of riffs on both of them in different styles, and afterwards I'll give you my conclusions, talk to you in a little bit more detail about the two guitars, and tell you which one of the two I would buy at the end of the day. Now I did just want to say that I have done dedicated reviews and demos of both of these two guitars on my channel already, so you can find links to those videos in the descriptions. I go into a lot more detail about the specifications and the stories of the two guitars in those videos, so go and watch those after this if you need more info. But a little bit more about the specifications of the two guitars then. We'll start with the Harley Benton SC Junior. Now this guitar has a mahogany body and a mahogany neck. The fingerboard is amaranth, which is a wood which you will find on lots of Harley Benton guitars these days. It's one of those modern day rosewood ebony replacements. This is the headstock. You'll recognize the Harley Benton headstock shape there. We've got a Graphtec nut. If I twist over to the back, we've got Wilkinson Deluxe tuners. And if we come down to the body end here, we've got a single Roswell P90 pickup, a single volume and tone control, and this is the WSC bridge. WSC sounds like Wilkinson, but it's not actually a Wilkinson designation. This is a separate brand, and the 6 strings are all individually intonatable on this guitar, so that's something that the V120 doesn't have, but I'll get onto that in a second. Just flipping round to the back of the body here, you can see that you've got a sloping heel joint there, which gives you better upper fret access than a standard straight Gibson Les Paul one from back in the day would have done. Let me just pop the SC Junior down then, and we'll pick up the V120. Now, as I get this in my hands, it's straight away a heftier beast all round. So it's got a mahogany body and a one-piece mahogany neck, and the body is actually a millimetre or two thicker than the SC Junior's body. The neck is also much thicker than that of the SC Junior, so we can instantly see that there is a big difference there. And the one-piece mahogany neck possibly hints to a little bit of extra quality with this guitar, but again, that's something I'll talk about after we've played them. So to the headstock then, the vintage headstock, I'm guessing you're all absolutely familiar with at this point in time. We've got a Graphtec new bone nut there. If I flip us round to the back, we've got Wilkinson Deluxe tuners, exactly the same as on the SC Junior there. And if we come down to the body, here we've got a Wilkinson P90 pickup, a Wilkinson bridge, which is fixed and is intonatable, but not for each string individually. And we've got a volume and tone control. You can see the mahogany grain through the finish there. It's really nice to look at. It's a beautiful guitar. And if I flip to the back, again, we've got that very similar extended upper fret access via this sloping heel joint. So the fretboard on the V120 is Lignum Rosa, and that's a wood that Trev Wilkinson, the designer and consultant for vintage guitars for many years, chose to replace rosewood when vintage moved away from rosewood because of CITES in 2017. So just a final word on the pickup then before we move on. So when I originally reviewed this guitar, I assumed that this Wilkinson W90SK was a single P90 standard pickup. But a couple of people wrote on my video and said, hey, isn't that a stacked one? Because SK might designate a stacked pickup. And so I wrote to Vintage and Trev Wilkinson directly and said, hey guys, can you shed a bit of light on this? And Trev Wilkinson got back to me and said, yes, if this is the SK pickup, it's a stacked one. So it's not stacked in the same way as, for example, the Harley Benton SC Junior Fats are. This is not a humbucking pickup in that sense, but it is stacked, so it's got some extra wiring and bits and pieces in it. Trevor's done a little bit of his magic and wound it in a way that only he knows to make it sound fantastic. To me, it sounds just like a regular P90 pickup, but it does have a little bit less noise, and it does have a slightly different tonal response, as you're going to hear in the playing section coming up. Okay then, so that is a little bit of information on the Vintage V120 and the Harley Benton SC Junior. What we're going to do now is play both of them for you in a bunch of different styles. I shall be using my Hughes & Kettner Black Spirit 200 to play all the riffs here. We'll use the amp's clean channel, the crunch channel and the lead channel for different amounts of dirt. And for some metal playing at the end, I'll go back to the clean channel and engage the Rev G3 distortion pedal to do some of that in drop D tuning. Enough talk then, let's play the Vintage V120 and the Harley Benton SC Junior, and we'll speak in more detail about them afterwards. Alright then, so that was the Vintage V120 versus the Harley Benton SC Junior. I hope you enjoyed the sounds. I had a lot of fun doing this video and hearing the direct comparisons. I've taken a couple of days since I did the playing part just to listen back a few times to hear the kind of subtle intricacies and the differences between the two pickups, how the guitars responded, etc. And now I've been able to form my own opinions even more strongly on what I think about the two guitars with the benefit of hindsight. So they are both very similar models, but there's quite a lot to say about them in this final part, so buckle up and strap yourselves in for my unscientific analysis. I'm going to start with the looks of the two guitars because I think how a guitar looks is very important. When you go into a guitar store or when you're browsing online, the ones that catch your eye are the ones that you're going to look at first. So if these didn't look decent, even though they're budget, affordable guitars, we wouldn't be giving them a second look. And I'm happy to say that both guitars look great. I particularly enjoy that you can see the mahogany grain coming through the two-tone sunburst finish on the Vintage V120. The Harley Benton, of course, is a black finish. You can't see any of the mahogany through that, of course. But I also like the fact that both guitars have nice dark fingerboards. So the Lignum Rosa on the V120 is nice and dark, and the amaranth on the Harley Benton is even darker. That's almost black, and I assume it's been dyed. And this one might have been too. I'm not 100% sure, but that looks great. We all love a nice dark rosewood or ebony board, don't we? One factor where I think the Vintage wins out in the aesthetics is actually with the tuning keys. It's something that's quite subtle, but if you see the two headstocks close to each other, you notice it, as I did, and hopefully I can just get a picture which I can blend in here to show you it. But the tuning keys on the V120 are actually aged white or ivory, whereas on the SC Junior they're actually bright white. Whatever they are, I just prefer that slightly about the V120. It's not a huge factor at all. They are literally the same tuners on there, Wilkinson W90SK Deluxe tuning keys, but the colour on the V120 is slightly better. Apart from that, the looks of both guitars are great, and they almost look to me as if they could have been built in the same factory. They're that similar. Okay, so that's the looks of the guitars. And now let's come to the build quality. And this is where you might expect that the Vintage would win out, because of course the Vintage costs about €100 or $100 more than the Harley Benton, and perhaps it does in some ways. On the face of it, both guitars have very, very good build quality, again, especially for the money. There's no major issues that I found with either. The one QC control thing I found with the Harley Benton, of course, if you remember my individual video from that, was that the wood on the underside of the fretboard had not been painted, or it didn't have the binding that was there in the dark color, so you can see that that's a totally light color to the wood. I'll blend an image of that up for you now as well so you can see that. So that's something that was missed at the factory. Other than that, no QC issues at all with the Harley Benton, and there were no QC issues that I could see at all with the Vintage V120 either. So in terms of build quality, fairly good for both of them. In terms of the woods used for the build quality, I would think that the Vintage is a little bit better than the Harley Benton. So you've got the mahogany body and a one-piece mahogany neck. I don't know how many pieces the Harley Benton one is, but a one-piece would certainly be more expensive to produce than a multi-piece. Now, the body of the V120 is also a millimetre or two thicker, and coupled with the thicker neck, that's probably going to give us better sustain and a bit more oomph and thickness and girth to the tones as well. So in that sense, perhaps the build quality is slightly better on the Vintage, but the overall playing experience is not too affected by that. And I suppose the last thing to talk about in terms of build quality would be the fingerboard materials too, because again, they don't affect the playing quality, but it might be something that psychologically affects us in terms of our minds. So we've got Lignum Rosa on the Vintage, which is a wood that Trev Wilkinson chose for the brand to use and is basically a rosewood laminate, if I understand what I've seen online correctly. And the Harley Benton SC Junior has amaranth as a fingerboard wood. They're both affordable woods, but both totally do the job, and I don't see any issues at this point. So build quality, full marks for both guitars. Now we come to the playability aspect of both guitars, and the key feature here is going to be the neck. So on the Vintage V120 that I'm holding now, you have this beast of a C-shaped neck, a really thick one, and on the SC Junior you have a pretty standard, almost modern C-shaped neck, which pretty much every hand is going to be comfortable with. Now, this is purely a taste thing, I think. If you prefer a big neck, you're going to love the V120. If you don't like big necks, this guitar will be a no-no for you. Whereas if you don't like big necks, you can easily play the SC Junior. And I think if you enjoy big necks too, the SC Junior's neck is not a skinny one, so you could play that. And in that sense, the SC Junior will probably find a wider audience in terms of the playability. Now, otherwise, both guitars also share this sloping heel joint there, so they both give you better upper fret access. So in that sense, they're both easier to play than a traditional Gibson Les Paul Junior would be, for example. And another thing to talk about is the weight. I would say both of these guitars have an authentic weight, a correct weight. They don't feel super heavy like cheap guitars often do. They're not super lightweight either. So the Harley Benton comes in at just under 7 pounds, and the Vintage V120 is almost a pound heavier, so comes in at closer to 8 pounds, but both feel very good to play sitting down, both feel very good on the strap, both feel like real guitars when you're playing them. So in terms of playability then, if you like a fat neck, it's going to be the V120. If you don't, it's going to be the SC Junior. But both don't have any issues in terms of the build of the guitar or in terms of QC that make you think this one is less playable than the other. So let's come to the sounds now, and that's another key part of the guitar, of course. If you've got a beautifully built guitar that plays fantastically but sounds awful, then what's the point? A guitar has to sound good, and thankfully both of these do. Now, I thought it when I was playing it, and I almost thought that the guitar sounded pretty much identical as I was playing them. But as I've listened back to the sounds that I recorded over the past couple of days, I've noticed there are some subtle differences, and hopefully you guys have too when watching the sound samples. So both guitars have a P90 pickup. In the V120, we've got the Wilkinson W90SK, which is actually stacked in a certain way. So it's not like a humbucking stacked P90 like you'll find on the Harley Benton DC Junior Fats, for example. It's just a P90 as you would know it, with some extra wires, some extra magnets. It's been wound a bit differently, and it just has some less hum that you would expect from a normal P90. Now, the Roswell P90 in the SC Junior is a normal bog standard P90 and comes with all the hum. But how does that affect the sounds and the overall aural experience as we play and listen to the guitars? So if you go through the sound samples as I did, from clean to crunch to heavier, you'll notice straight away that the SC Junior with the Roswell P90 has a bit more top end. It has a bit more of a sparkling chime in the highs, and the V120 has a bit more of a fuller sound. Overall well-rounded, I would say, and a little bit more low end. And the low end comes out a bit more, and even more so as you come to the heavier stuff. When we were using the Rev G3 at the end to play the metal things, I really thought there was more low end to the Wilkinson pickup. Now, conversely, I would also say that the SC Junior Roswell P90 is perhaps slightly more suited to metal, because in a way it seems to have a slightly higher and hotter output. I've not measured how hot either of the pickups are. I don't have the facilities to do that. I just have my ears. But those are my opinions, and I'd be really interested to know if you guys agree with that, or if you think they sound the same. It could just be that I've listened way too much to both of the pickups and I'm starting to hear things that aren't there. But I don't believe so anyway. So in terms of sounds, I love both of the guitars, and I think it's a taste thing as to which you prefer. And in 99% of cases, both are going to do an amazing job if you want P90 tones. So with all that said and done then, which guitar should you buy? Now, if you're in the market for an affordable P90 equipped guitar and you've got 200 or 300 euros or dollars in your pocket, the Vintage V120 and the Harley Benton SC Junior are going to be two of the main ones that are going to be kind of on your shopping list or your list of guitars to check out or consider. And I would say that at the end of the day, one very important factor is going to be the price. 300 euros or dollars for the Vintage V120 and 200 for the Harley Benton SC Junior. So there's actually a €100 price difference. And the other major difference is going to be this neck. I've said it repeatedly now, but the neck on the Vintage V120 is very, very large. If you don't like big necks, you can immediately discount this guitar, I would say. I do recommend, of course, that you play it first in person at a dealer if that's possible for you. But really, if you like skinnier necks and you're thinking you might be able to handle it, well, you might, but I know players who might not as well. Whereas the SC Junior has a very inoffensive, standard modern C-shaped neck, which is suitable pretty much for any hand. Now, if I was going into a music store myself and I was looking for an affordable junior type guitar, the way these guitars look, I would want to try them both because they both look great. They both look like the real thing, and I can see that they're nicely built, and I can see that they offer good value for money with the Wilkinson hardware, etc. But I'd instantly come across this neck and feel, okay, this is the one difference. This is going to make my decision for me. Now, personally, most of my guitars have slightly thinner necks than the V120, and it was a little bit of a shock for me at first to get used to this one. But after an hour or so of playing, I did, and I've actually really come to enjoy it more and more over recent days as I've kept this guitar and have played it a bit more. Now, do I prefer it to the SC Junior neck? No. However, there might be something in the fact that the extra wood here and the extra wood in the body and the fact that this is a one-piece mahogany neck gives you slightly more sustain to the notes. That's something my amateur ears don't really hear. The 0.1% of you might hear something there, but I don't think it's really going to be too much of an issue. The overall two factors here are the price and the neck. Now, if price is not an issue, you can choose between the two. If you want to go for the most affordable option, the SC Junior is going to be your boy. It's going to do a great job. Budget in a setup with both of these guitars and you're going to end up with something which is worth way more than the sum of its parts. I've really enjoyed having both guitars. I own the SC Junior. I shall continue to enjoy owning it. I don't own the V120 yet, but maybe one day I will. They tend to come up, both these guitars actually, at pretty good used prices, so if I ever see a cheap used one, I might pick one of these up for those days where I really want that fat neck. And of course the Wilkinson stacked P90 is a lot of fun as well, although the difference in the sound of the two pickups is not enough that it would make me personally make a decision for one over the other. So that's all my ramblings for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope it's given you some food for thought if you're considering maybe purchasing one of these two guitars. Of course, there are other instruments in the junior territory that you could go for, most notably of course the Epiphone Les Paul Junior. Those are very, very good guitars as well, and they come in at slightly more expensive than the Vintage, so they're one step up in budget again. But there are other brands of guitars that also come with single P90 equipped models, so check as many out as you can. Check these two out as well, make your choice. And the good thing is that in 2021 and beyond, the quality of even the most affordable guitars that we have is really, really good. It's never been a better time to be a guitar player. And on that note, I have to say, I hope you're enjoying the Rich Words Music channel. There are many more guitar-based videos to come. I'm doing a lot more stuff with pedals and amps and other people from the industry in the coming months. So stick around, subscribe and like the video. Watch the dedicated reviews of each of these two guitars if you want. Ask me questions in the comments and I will answer them all and talk to you down there. But that's been it for today's video. I've been Rich for Rich Words Music and I shall see you in the next one. Bye for now.